Hello and welcome to another episode of Positively Negative. Today I've got a really cool little camera to show you. It's called the Zeiss Ikon Contina 2. Okay, now Zeiss Ikon has got famously confusing naming conventions. I also have a Contina Matic 2, which is actually a later camera and actually I think a slightly inferior camera to this one as well. And we'll see why shortly. So, first things first, the Zeiss Ikon Contina 2 is a 35mm rangefinder camera that was released in about 1953. I think they only manufactured these for about 2 years, from 1953 to 1954. Okay, they came in two different configurations, one equipped with a 45mm 2.8 Tessar lens and one equipped with a 45mm f3.5 Nova lens. My one comes with a Tessar lens, which I think is slightly more expensive, well at least it was then. I think now it doesn't really make a difference, but when it was new that was the more expensive model. Mine also comes with a 1/500th max shutter speed, where the Nova one only came with a 1/300th of a second maximum shutter speed. Okay, so that's the sort of technical stuff out the way. But the most obvious thing that you'll notice immediately is that this Zeiss Ikon Contina is a folding camera. Okay, so the lens actually folds into the body and folds out of the body, like so. Right, did you hear that click? That click means it's folded out all the way. All right, now that folding design means that there's bellows inside the body. Okay, so they're protected. So apparently the bellows failing is a very rare issue with these cameras, so don't worry too much about that. But this means that the lens can fold back into the body and that this camera can be very small. Right, if I just get my phone over here, you'll see that it's actually smaller than a smartphone. Okay, it's a little bit thicker, but it's quite pocketable. If you've got a big jacket or a big coat or something, you can easily slip this guy into your jacket or coat pocket. Right, so let's take a closer look at the actual body of the camera. Obviously, the first thing I noticed was how symmetrical it is. You know, it seems like most camera designs are not symmetrical. You know, the lenses are often a little bit off to one side, and, you know, there's things that are present on one side of the camera but not present on the other side of the camera. But with this camera, you've got like two knobs at the top, two at the bottom, and, you know, these viewfinder windows are all symmetrically placed, so it feels very symmetrical, and there's something quite pleasing about that to me. Perhaps if you are anti-symmetrical, it might freak you out a little bit. But anyway, let's start with the top panel of the camera and then move forward from there. So the first thing you'll notice looking at the top panel is that it's quite bare. On the left hand side you have a film reminder, that's all. It's just to remind you what kind of film is in the camera. Right? And because of the age of this camera, it goes all the way back to ASA 16 film and only up till 200 ASA or ISO film. Color in black and white. So you can select that up here just to remind yourself what kind of film is in the camera. That doesn't do anything to change any setting. This camera has no light meter built in, so when you're setting that dial at the top, all you're doing is reminding yourself what film is in the camera. It's not setting a light meter or anything. Okay, important to remember. Then on the other side, on the right hand side of the top panel, you have a strange dial that has measurements in feet, going from 3 feet to 20 and then infinity. First I had to wrap my head around feet because we come from a metric country, and I was like, what, 3 feet's 1 meter? Okay, sort of understand. But anyway, I didn't really get what this was for until I realized that when I look through the the rangefinder window at the back of the camera, and I turn the dial on the right hand side, the two images within the rangefinder window overlap. And then I realized something. This is an uncoupled rangefinder. Okay, so what does that mean? That means when I look through the rangefinder window at the back of the camera, which is this one on the left hand side, the one in the middle is the viewfinder, the rangefinder window is coupled with this distance scale on the right hand side of the top panel. So when I overlap those two images in the rangefinder window, I am actually measuring the distance to my subject. And then I can read off that distance from this dial on the top of the panel. So let's say, for example, I've measured the distance to my subject, and I found out that it was 20 feet away, okay? Because I looked down on this dial, and the little arrow there is pointing to 20 feet, okay? That is not connected to the lens. That's very important to remember. All you've done is measured the distance. Now we have to transplant that information from the distance measure at the top to the actual lens, okay? So we open up our lens again. And now we turn the front focusing element of the lens to 20 feet. And there we go, it matches up perfectly. So now I know, for example, that my subject, which is 20 feet away, will be in perfect focus, okay? Now, this is quite a big step up from, the other Contina models, which were scale focusing cameras, where you just had to guess the distance to your subject and then kind of hope for the best. With this one, you can get very precise focusing, and I've actually found the rangefinder, on my one at least, to be completely accurate. I've nailed focus most of the time. The only time I didn't nail focus is when I forgot to transfer this distance to the lens. Okay, so it's very important that you remember that if you're ever using this camera, when you are turning this top dial and lining up the images in your rangefinder, that is not connected to the lens. You have to transfer that information on the top dial to the lens. Okay, it's like an extra step that you have to remember. Also, at the middle of the top panel, you'll see a cold shoe, so you can mount a flash or something like that. And that's really it. Right, so if you're more used to the more traditional top panels where you've got your shutter speed selectors and things like that, you'll probably find the top panel quite bare. But that's because all of that information, all of those settings are actually found around the lens of the barrel. Okay, so let's look at that now. The furthest back selection dial at the back of the lens, the one closest to the body, is your aperture selector. So there we can select our apertures on this lens from f2.8 wide open all the way down to f22. Okay, then the next rung, we have our shutter speed selector, which goes all the way from 1 second. We have a bulb, 1 second, all the way to 1/500th of a second. Okay, and again, that's quite easy. For some reason, my one is quite tricky, or it seems quite tight to turn to the 1/500th of a second speed. It's noticeably tighter than the other shutter speeds, and it makes me think that maybe I shouldn't use that speed. Something tells me that the spring is going to be wound too tight, and it just sort of it makes me a bit nervous. So I just sort of max out at 1/250th, just to be safe. Maybe I'm overcautious. And then on the front of the lens, we have our distancing scale as well. Now, this camera's got the same system as my other Zeiss camera, this sort of red dot focusing system, where if you line up all the red dots, you get the lens's hyperfocal length, okay? So the red dot here is between 10 and 20 feet away, and then it lines up with f8. So if you line up those two red dots, it means that when you snap away, everything from about 9 feet up until infinity away from you should be in focus. So I imagine, in the mid-1950s, you were on holiday somewhere, maybe in the recently liberated Paris, and you're taking snaps of all the beautiful architecture and stuff, and you don't really want to go about measuring distance all the time. It's such a schlep. So you use the red dot system and the hyperfocal length of the lens, and then you snap away, and everything should be more or less in focus. Well, everything from 9 feet in front of you and beyond, right? It's a good little system, and it means that you can actually work quite quickly if you know what you're doing. Okay. So how do you take a photograph? Well, okay, we've already mentioned it's quite a schlep. The first step is obviously to focus, right? But let's pretend we've already focused, okay? The next thing we need to do is to cock our shutter, okay? Now on this model, you cock the shutter by turning this front knob upwards, okay? Now the shutter is cocked. I read online that with the other model, the Nova lens, it's the other way around. You cock the shutter by pressing it down. No idea why that's the case, but it is. Then to fire the shutter, you press this larger one downwards. But now you'll notice on mine, I can't fire the shutter right now. Now, the first time I tried this, I thought that there was something wrong. I thought the shutter was broken. I thought that it had seized up. I thought I'd done something wrong. But no, actually, it's a feature of the camera. And now it's there to prevent double exposures. So this camera, this shutter, will only fire if you have a roll of film in the body and you've wound on to the next frame, Okay, only then will you be able to fire the shutter. Okay, but if you want to test that your shutter is working, you can stick your finger here at the bottom and trigger the shutter manually. Okay, there's a little latchy thing here. Okay, there, it fired. That's just if you want to test that it's working. Okay, but the shutter release button at the top will not fire unless you have a roll of film in the camera and you have wound on to the next frame. Okay, so if you find one of these in the wild and you can't trigger the shutter, that's probably what's stopping you. It's not the shutter that's broken. Okay, that's good to remember. You also have a M and X flash selector. So M is those old bulbs, you know, those old flash bulbs which you don't really get anymore. And X is your more modern flashes. And because it's a leaf shutter system, the flash will synchronize at all speeds. So you can actually use a flash quite well with this camera. It's quite a good setup. Alright, so that's all the controls. Now moving on to the bottom panel of the camera. Now interestingly, the frame counter is actually at the bottom. Okay, so in the middle of the bottom panel, you'll see your frame counter to show you how many shots you've taken and how many shots you have left, of course. Then you've got two circular dials on either side of the bottom panel. One with an arrow that says A and the other one with an arrow that says R. Now that means advance and rewind. Okay, so your advance knob, advanced dial, you turn to advance your film, like so, and it makes a very nice ratcheting sort of clicking sound. Okay, and that auto stops at every new frame. Okay, it works very well. Then, when you reach the end of your roll and you need to rewind the film, you depress a button at the middle of your advance dial, and you turn the rewind dial, and rewind, 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 rewind. And I tell you, after doing a couple of rolls of rewinding like this, you miss the crank. You can see why the more modern cameras had a crank, because it's a much more efficient way of winding in the film. It can take a good few minutes, and your thumb and forefinger get pretty exhausted after a while. Loading film is a little bit interesting. So I'm just going to close this front latch, which you do by squeezing these two side panels together, and then it closes, clicks nicely. Loading the film is a little bit interesting in that it is actually back to front of what I usually see. So how you open the back of the camera is you push this lever downwards, right, and then it opens. Now normally with 35mm cameras, you place your cartridge on the left hand side and you pull your leader across to the right. But with this camera it's actually the other way around. You place your cartridge on the right hand side upside down and you pull it across to the left and you slide your film into this take-up spool over here, which makes perfect sense because this is where the advanced dial is. Okay, so you slide your film in there, you advance a few times until it sticks. Okay, and you close the door. Make sure to push this latch upwards again. It doesn't click into place, you have to push the latch upwards. Okay, now you have to turn your frame counter to the beginning by using your thumbnail or something like that. You turn this dial up till the diamond mark. Okay, now when it's at the diamond mark, that's like the start of the roll, and then you can start winding on your film using your advance lever, and it will advance to the first frame. So you'll advance, 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 advance until you get to the first frame, and then the camera will stop automatically for you. Okay, it's actually quite a good little system. It works really well. It's just sort of back to front of how things normally work, and again, it took me 3 seconds to get used to, because obviously you don't have the thumb winding knob. You know, everyone's used to that sort of shoot and wind, but with this it's shoot and wind, shoot and wind, and it works just as well actually, if not just a little bit slower. Now if you're anything like me, you're probably wondering where on earth is the tripod screw mount? Like, how do I get this thing on a tripod? And it took me ages to figure this out, but it's actually quite cute. Look at the front of the camera. Here on the door here on the front, this little guy here is actually the hole for the tripod. It's actually the socket for the tripod. So you unscrew this guy here on the front, and there we go. Now we have a tripod socket, which obviously when we've opened the lens is directly underneath the lens and will go onto a tripod perfectly. So it took me a long time to figure that one out. I felt a bit silly when I did, but that's where it is. Okay, so if your camera still has its little screw-in thing, which mine does, I'm amazed, that's where it is. Now I bought this camera from somebody in town. It was her grandfather's camera apparently, and it's clear that her grandfather was quite serious about photography. This camera, being the Tessar model, would have been a bit more expensive than the Nova model, and it would have been quite a bit more expensive than many of the other Zeiss Ikon cameras of the time. So her grandfather was clearly a camera enthusiast. And not only the camera, he had a lot of the additional sort of bells and whistles as well. The coolest of these additional things was the leather case that the camera came with. Now you can see that this leather case is in perfect condition, and it does one thing that's quite clever. So putting the camera in the case is easy. We just open up the front like that. Look, it's still got the velvet interior and everything, how lovely. All right, and we just slide the camera in like so. Okay, it's got two little latches here on the left and right hand side that will go over the strap lugs there. Okay, we just make sure that this is lined up properly. There we are. It goes like that. Okay, and now we're in, right? Now normally these sorts of things, the case screws into a tripod hole, right? Tripod socket. That's how it stays on, right? So I was a bit confused at first. I was like, okay, how do I get this on? It fits on those corner sides. You'll see, because the middle of the bottom of the case has a hole for our frame counter, so we can still see that even when it's in the case. And this is actually linked to the advanced style. So it's got little screws that go into little holes in the advanced style, which means that you can advance your film through the case. Like so, right? So in other words, once you've loaded film into this camera, you can shoot it completely while it's still in the case, which is awesome. Right, now the case is quite stylish, and it comes with a nice strap, and now you can take it around with you and you're sorted. And as soon as you see something you want to photograph, you just pop open this front panel here, open up your lens, and now you're ready to shoot. Isn't that cool? I think it's pretty cool. I think it's pretty clever. All right. The camera also came with, believe it or not, the original UV filter in the original Zeiss Ikon branded box. Look at this awesome little box. Isn't that so cool? This is from 1953, right? This cardboard, and it still looks pristine. I think that's so cool. The camera also came with its original lens hood. So it's a metal lens hood that's written at the top, Zeiss Ikon Stuttgart, right? And that just slides onto the lens using friction, like so. Okay, so if you're shooting in a very sunny, bright environment and you want to avoid lens flare, it's nice if you have access to one of these. I don't know how rare they are. Luckily, mine came with a camera. Now, of course, when this is on, you can't close the lens anymore. All right, so bear that in mind. You don't want to damage your camera, so make sure that you take off the hood when you want to close the lens again. All right, so that's basically all of the technical stuff out the way. Now I want to show you some photographs I've taken with the camera, because I've actually ended up taking it out with me a lot more than I thought I would. It's funny, I've sort of grabbed it as I've gone, probably because it's so small and convenient. It's sort of a camera that you reach for when you're just going out for a walk or something. So I'll show you some pictures I've taken with it, both in color and black and white, so that you can see the performance of the lens, because I think for a lens from 1953, I think it works really well. Alright guys, so that's the Zeiss Ikon Contina 2. So why did I get it? Why should you consider getting one? And if you do, what should you pay for it? Well, I got it because my dad saw the ad online, and I was curious. I knew what the Zeiss Ikon Contina was, but I'd never seen a folding one before, and I've never owned a folding camera before. So I thought, okay, let me give this one a go. Let me go and have a look and see, you know, what sort of condition it's in. And the ad said, make me an offer, kind of thing. So I thought, okay, why not? The seller's pretty close by. Let's go for a drive, right? And when I saw the camera, and when I saw the condition it was in, and when I saw that it came with all of its lens hoods and UV filters and all the original boxes and stuff, I knew that I wanted it. You know, I just decided, you know, I've come all this way. We need to go home with the camera. And I got all of it, the camera, the case, the hoods, everything, for 500 bucks, 500 rand. So that's like $35, something like that. And I mean, for a price like that, how could I say no, really? And it seems that that's more or less what these cameras go for online. They're not particularly valuable, strangely enough, considering the build quality and the sort of, you know, the Zeiss name. They actually aren't that expensive online. And I would say that if you are interested in getting one, I wouldn't pay more than like $100 for one. So that would be 1,500 rand. I mean, that would be probably on the upper limit. And I would really only pay that much if it came with some of the additional things like the case and the filters and stuff. What do I think the camera is good for? I think it's good for sort of day-to-day snaps. It's not a quick use camera. You're not going to take it to like a horse race or like a soccer match or something, because it's just not quick enough. And but anyway, if you're shooting with a 70-year-old camera, you're probably not interested in shooting sport anyway. It's really, for me, like a day-to-day snap machine, you know, for snapping pictures of your family, if you're going for a nice walk somewhere. And it's designed, I think, to be small and to be put in a pocket or to be taken out with you when you don't really want to carry something big and heavy. And I think in that way, I think it fulfills its function brilliantly. I think it's because it's so small and because it feels so nice, you find yourself reaching for it as you're going out the door, you know. So just keep a roll of film in it so that you can just grab it and go. I'm actually very fond of the camera. I used to be a bit hesitant of folding cameras. I thought, oh, folding cameras, it's just another thing that can break. Like, I don't really get the point. But now I can kind of see that the folding mechanism means that the camera can be much smaller, which is far more convenient as well. So if you're a Zeiss Ikon fanboy, or if you just like old German cameras, you know, built to an extremely high standard for not a lot of money, then I think the Zeiss Ikon Contina 2 might just be the camera for you. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.